Hello, my name is Terrell Rock. I'm the edTPA coordinator for Clemmer College at East Tennessee State University. Thank you for joining me today as we discuss the edTPA, what it's about, and how to help your teacher candidate perform well on this assessment. The edTPA has been implemented in Tennessee. It has replaced the Praxis PLT as a licensure requirement. As of January 2019, the passing score was 38. In 2020, it will be 40, and in 2021, it will be 42. As I said, this has replaced the Praxis PLT, which was the practice on principles of learning and teaching. The edTPA does correlate very well with TEAM and the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. It's a performance-based assessment, and it was created with a joint effort between Stanford University, Scale, and AACTE. It measures and supports the skills and knowledge of all teachers that are needed from day one in the classroom, and it's used by over 600 teacher prep programs in 40 states. It is transforming the preparation and certification of new teachers. It is very rigorous, and it does require teachers to give real artifacts to demonstrate that they have the classroom skills necessary to ensure students are learning. In this graphic, you can see that the edTPA, the National Board's standards, and TEAM are listed. That the major concepts that are being tested by each of these assessments. I have gone through and highlighted and color-coded those that are similar with the others. From here, you can clearly see that the edTPA does prepare new teachers for TEAM, and it does empower them to seek a national board certification later. Because the process is so similar, the national board certification does not seem as daunting as it might seem to others. So, with the scoring of the edTPA, there are for most there are 15 rubrics, and it has a very similar scoring philosophy that's rigorous. The scoring philosophy is very similar to that you know for TEAM. It has a scale of 1 to 5. A score of 3 is considered rock solid. It should be very difficult to make a score of 5, which is exceptional. And it is also unlikely that you'll get a score of 1. So it is 5 points with a similar scale. What we like for our students to do is to try to get a 3 and build on that for hopefully obtaining 4s and 5s. The edTPA is based around these 3 very important parts of teaching and learning. First of all, a teacher must plan to build content understandings and to support learning needs by using knowledge of students, and to create assessments to monitor student learning. With instruction, you have to keep in mind the learning environment, work to engage students and deepen their thinking, and use subject-specific pedagogy. For example, what would be the best practices that you should observe in a high school math classroom? Assessment should be ongoing. It's an analysis of student learning. Providing feedback should be quality feedback. And you need to support students in using feedback. So here we've got using data to inform instruction, justifying planning decisions, and analyzing teachers. As we know, this goes on and on and on in a good classroom. With the edTPA, there are three major tasks. The first is planning, the second is instruction, and the third is assessment. First, the student teachers are going to describe their class by completing a form called Context for Learning. We will look at all of these in more detail in a few moments. They will then plan a learning segment which consists of 3 to 5 consecutive lessons. They will gather and create instructional and assessment materials. They will write a commentary about their planning. And then for task 2, they're going to teach and video themselves as they teach this learning segment. They're going to go through their clips. They're going to find their best clips that fit a certain type of best practices that they're looking for, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. And they'll clip out of those, so the entire videos aren't sent. And then they will write a commentary about the instruction. The third task involved collecting and analyzing assessment data. Students have to come up with an assessment that assesses their at least part of their learning segment. They must come up with evaluation criteria for that assessment. They collect work samples. They give feedback to the students, and they provide evidence of that quality feedback. And then they write a commentary that analyzes the assessment. When this is completed, and it's a lengthy process, they upload it to the Pearson website for scoring. Pearson does not create these tests. However, they provide the platform for scoring. This is not a standardized test like we're familiar with. Students do not sit down in a room and take this on a computer, nor do they fill out bubble sheets. So, although they know, often teacher candidates and mentors know that this test is for licensure, they often think that it's like other tests. They go somewhere and take it, but this is not. This is more of a portfolio type assessment. It ends up looking like this, where you have all of these documents that that the teacher candidate creates. So you can see here evaluation criteria. We talked about that. The lesson plans, student work samples, and instructional materials, context for learning. I have 2 video clips all there. The rubrics are used to evaluate different parts of the edTPA. Rubrics 1 through 5 evaluate task 1, planning, and rubrics 5 through 10, they evaluate teaching effectiveness. That would be the instruction task. And then at the end, you have rubrics 11 through 15 that are used to assess and evaluate the teacher candidate on using assessments. Now, there are approximately 26 edTPA content areas that use nearly the same 15 rubrics and nearly the same prompts. So, although today you may be watching this and you are in a pre-K classroom, or you might be kindergarten, you could be high school physics, you could be middle school music, you could be a Spanish teacher. There is, for your content, an edTPA that has been written. There are some differences. Most of the prompts are very much alike, and because of that, I am able to talk in general terms, and you will be able to understand generally what's expected of this, but you should be aware that each content has its own handbook. World language has 13 rubrics because academic language is omitted from that assessment. There is an elementary education edTPA that has 18 rubrics that combines reading and math. However, at ETSU, we have students do elementary K-5 literacy or elementary K-5 math, and those are 15 rubrics. Mathematics includes mathematical precision. Within that would be the secondary mathematics. Their part of their academic language includes mathematical precision. Math and PE include discussions on dispositions. Special education, instead of using a class that they use with the edTPA, instead they use a focus student, one focus student throughout. Video recording requirements also vary. Some require more video, as with PE, and often music will feel the need to have more video requirements. Any performance type, performance-based content area. But some will have 2 video clips with a maximum of 20 minutes combined. Some will have 2 video clips, no more than 10 minutes apiece, things like that. So they each have something different but pretty similar. So basically, the most important thing you can do is probably something you're doing already, and that is to be supportive and positive. It's a very stressful year for teacher candidates, no matter what school they're in, whether they're at ETSU or any other university. It's a stressful year. They're learning so much on a day-to-day basis. For many, this is their first experience that is professional. So it is a stressful year. Being supportive and positive is very important. That includes, though, being careful that your language is also positive. And so I've learned to say things to students when they talk to me about how hard the edTPA is and how it seems to be horrible. I tell them the edTPA is hard, but you can do it, and I'm here to help. So knowing that you recognize that their feelings are valid is important, and for them to understand that you are there to help them may also relieve some of their stress. There are other things you can suggest that I could say that you might say to them. The College of Ed wants you to be successful. Have you asked your professors for help? This is very rigorous, and I believe we're both going to learn from the experience. In my final example, let's see if we can find the answer in your edTPA handbook. Task 1. The teacher candidates are going to get to know their school, their classroom, the students, and the communities, and they're going to write about that in their context for learning. They're going to keep that context for learning in mind as they do their planning, so that they are planning for the class that's in front of them, not a class that they've never met. It's not next year's class, it's not last year's class, it's the one that's in front of them. They're going to choose a central focus. And we define central focus as basically the big idea, or perhaps the theme of the learning segment. For example, it might be weather, how weather affects communities, or whatever you're focusing on. They're going to plan the learning segment that's based around that central focus. They're going to come up with instructional materials and assessments, and they can use instructional materials and assessments that are published, or they could use your materials. If they use published materials, then they need to just include those in their um, citations. They then will write a commentary that describes the thinking behind the planning, and then they'll provide artifacts. Artifacts are what we call these things: context for learning, 3 to 5 lesson plans, instructional materials, and assessment materials. On the previous slide, where we saw the files, those are the artifacts. The artifacts are actually what is submitted to Pearson, and the scorers are trained to go through those artifacts and use the rubrics to evaluate those things. So these are the artifacts for task 1. The planning commentary is the maximum number of pages that they can write is, I believe, 9 or 10 for most content areas, usually around 10, I believe. They ask a series of questions. There's 5 questions. There's a part A, a B, a C to each of those questions. The questions are a little difficult to understand. They involve complex sentences, and so often it's important for them to study the questions and be really careful that they answer all the questions. These questions asked about their ability to use knowledge of students to inform their teaching and learning. And how does this teacher candidate support varied student learning needs? How does he or she support academic language? And how do they plan assessments to monitor and support student learning? So, what does it look like? Well, here's the context for learning. This is actually just one page of the context for learning. It's generally about 3 pages long. You can see that they are asking what type of school it is, where it is, and then the teacher candidate perhaps take some time to describe the community around their learning. And then here we have the lesson plans. There'll be anywhere from 3, and a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5 lesson plans. They're generally fairly long. This is just one page of a 4-page lesson plan. The limit on the pages is 4. But these are lesson plans that we use from ETSU. This is actually not the current template. It's very similar to this, but it's not the current template. But they will be using ETSU's template, which has all of the parts in it needed to do well on the edTPA. And then they will come up with, this is the instructional material someone has created for their learning segment, and then the assessments that they have planned for the learning segment. Then they write their planning commentary, and you can see how it's laid out. So this is a template. They get a template, and when they open the template, all you'll see are the questions, and then the student actually goes in. There's these brackets that are blank, and the student goes in and they answer the question inside of the brackets. And they do that for about 5 questions. So this is just page 1 of someone's planning commentary. So task 1, again, they describe their context for learning. They plan the segment. They have the structural materials, the assessment materials, and they write a commentary. We complete this at ETSU during the fall semester, during October and December. That seems early because they're not going to teach it until end of January and beginning of February. The problem is that the task 1 takes up the most time of any of the tasks. It is very time consuming. They're learning all this stuff while they're doing it, so it just takes a long time. We like for them to begin it in the fall with a learning segment in mind that your class would be teaching in late January, early February. And so how can you help your teacher candidate? Well, helping them find the information that they need about the accommodations that you're using for your IEP and 504 students. Um, Giving them the central focus, the topic that they need to write their learning segment on as early as they ask for it. Many will start asking about this in September. And the sooner that they get that together, the better. Now, that doesn't mean that you are locked in and have to teach that at that time come the end of January, the beginning of February. The students can always go and write up another one. And everybody groans when I say that, but truthfully, they can uh, write it again so much faster than the first time they wrote one, and it's really not as bad as that sounds. So they also need to be thinking about what class or focus student that they're going to be using as the focus of their edTPA. And my big advice here is that your quietest class is not the class you want to use. You don't want to use the class that's got horrible behavior, and you don't want to use a class that's so good they won't participate in discussion or volunteer answers. So you need to have a class that where the students are excited about learning. Sometimes their excitement might lead them to shout out when inappropriately and that sort of thing, but that is better than having a class that just really won't get engaged. So help them locate and understand and apply the information about their students. Help them plan ahead by finding a topic that's going to fit into their timeline and be suitable for task 2. And whenever you're going through your day-to-day planning, uh, talk to your teacher candidate about how you create and find appropriate assessments. And how do you plan to support individual needs? Oftentimes, an experienced veteran teacher is doing these things so automatically, they might not even be aware that they're doing it. But for our teacher candidates, it's important that they understand how this process goes about. So, taking time to discuss with them how this is done is pretty important. And talk to them also about how you take assessment and data from assessments to help inform your future instruction. Let's talk about task 2. In task 2, you're going to teach and video their learning segment, and the video must show evidence that there is respect and rapport between students and teachers. They need to show a positive, low risk, challenging learning environment. The video must show that the teacher candidate is meeting the needs of varied learners and that the students are engaged, the instruction is relevant, that there are higher ordered thinking problems and questions, and that they're using subject specific pedagogy. That is the best practices, for example, used in your content area. For example, in high school history, we like to include supporting arguments as a best practice. Then the teacher candidates will write an analysis of the teaching and learning that occurred. The artifacts are 2 video clips. The teacher candidates are going to need to obtain parental permission and film the entirety of all lessons taught in the learning segment. They will find 1 to 2 clips that show these behaviors: positive, low risk, challenging learning environment, meeting individual needs, student engagement. So sometimes we have a problem because the students are assuming that the video tape is about them giving a fantastic lecture, coming in dressed as Abraham Lincoln and giving a very great lecture. Might be wonderful, but it's not what we're looking at here. So students need to focus their lessons on getting the students engaged. Student teachers need to not submit lectures or long, lengthy explanations. And instead, they need to focus on student engagement. So task 2, you will submit they will teach and video the learning segment, and then they'll write a commentary about the instruction. That commentary is usually about 7 pages. And this is done during residency too. So they've planned for the learning segment in the fall, and now here in the spring, they're going to do a little fine-tune planning. Sometimes they come in, they have to rewrite the whole thing. In high school, you often, and middle school, you often have a different group of students than what you had in the fall, so you might need to submit your context for learning. But the most important thing is that they teach this learning segment as they planned and they record it. And then from there, they get their clips. So it's important that teacher candidates keep in mind the type of lesson needed when writing their lesson plan. So what I often do with my teacher candidates is I talk with them about how they need to have lessons that are about engagement, not about, for example, too much lecture. And so they have to keep that in mind. And you can help your teacher candidates by when they are talking to you about their learning segment that they're planning, ask them questions like, how are the students going to be engaged? Are you using the best practices that we use here in this science classroom or in our reading? You can help your teacher candidate collect permission forms. That's important. We do request that you remain in the room during the videotaping. You actually can be in the videotape. You're just not there as the lead teacher. The teacher candidate can explain that the mentor was in the room assisting, and that's perfectly acceptable. You can assist in the recording, but not in choosing the clips. So if they come to you and they say, help me find the clips, you can't do it. I'm sorry. We just can't do that. So during their time with you, talk with your teacher candidates about strategies that you think are useful in getting students involved in a lesson, ways to encourage students to answer questions and to motivate discussions, and how you put in higher order thinking problems and questions. What are some ways to promote a low risk learning environment? And how can a teacher demonstrate respect for students and encourage respect among students and establish rapport? And of course, those best practices for your subject. So it's very important that as you work with our teacher candidates, adding that into your conversation and also reflecting on what went well and what needs to be improved on for future lessons. Task 3 is assessment, and the teacher candidate is going to have to design or find an assessment that has very clear alignment to the objectives or some of the objectives of their learning segment. They will come up with an evaluation criteria. They will analyze the assessment data that they collect and collect the work samples and find 3 of them that are what can show different learning patterns. They're going to provide quality feedback on these work samples. And then they're going to write a commentary that describes or analyzes student learning, feedback that guides instruction, plans for supporting students with using the feedback, language use, and next steps. The artifacts that are brought in are the assessment, the evaluation criteria, 3 student work samples, and this asterisk is there because it's not that way. For example, special ed and I think early childhood both have a different requirement there, but all that's described in the PE has got a little work sample difference too. All those handbooks for PE, SPED, and early childhood are included there. Quality feedback, evidence of academic language use, all this is part of it. So they're thinking about by what means will I evaluate their achievement, what criteria will I use, how can I give feedback that's derived from the evaluation criteria, how can students use my feedback to improve their learning outcome. So the assessment commentary is this teacher candidates are going to provide an analysis of student learning. They have to support their analysis with data and student work samples. They describe how the feedback that they gave promotes learning, how they supported students in understanding and using that feedback. They will describe academic language use that is seen in an artifact that they provide, and they will explain how they're going to use this analysis mentioned here in the planning for next steps. So this is an example of lesson 1 evaluation criteria, lesson 2 evaluation criteria. So this is an example of evaluation criteria that was submitted by one of our students. Notice she's put in rubrics. She's put in, these are her objectives. It's pretty well done. This is a student work sample, and you can see that this teacher candidate has put in quite a bit of useful feedback, not just good job. And here is also further feedback where she's taken a rubric and she's used that to give them an idea of where they are standing, and then she gives feedback that explains to them what they need to keep doing and what they need to work on. So she does that for 3 of the students that she submitted work samples for. And then the assessment commentary is again like a 9 or 10 page document. It includes usually a graph or a chart that describes how they did according to the evaluation criteria. This student did an excellent job. She included the standard, the objective, and how the students did on the objective and the standard, which is exactly what she needed to do. So the end is near. Hang in there. For task 3, as they are teaching the learning segment, they will be collecting assessment. And they will then, after they've completed the task 2 and they've given the assessment, they're going to start studying the results, analyzing the data, looking at the work samples, finding a work sample that shows a learning trend, and then they'll write task 3 commentary. They are going to submit to scoring to Pearson for scoring no later than the end of March, so that we get scores back in time for graduation. So how can you help? Well, always involve your teacher candidate as much as you can in the assessment process. We realize that in Residency 1, they are not there full time, but having meaningful conversations are important. Allow them to observe you while you're choosing assessments. You can discuss with them or have them look at the assessment and see what objectives your assessment aligns with. You can discuss rationale for choosing assessments and your evaluation criteria. And having the teacher candidates have the experience of creating an assessment would be very, very useful for them. Allow your teacher candidate to look through student work. Often I find that checking papers is a good thing for them to do in their placement, so that they can see what the students' work looks like and how well the students are doing. Ask them when they do that to analyze learning, to check, not just check the papers, but for them to make a list of what the students' needs are and the students' strengths. And this is asking them to look for a learning pattern, which is exactly what they need to do in the assessment section. Let them practice giving feedback on student work. You should, of course, check through their feedback, make sure it's appropriate, but letting them practice that would be good. And also discussing next steps. So once you've given an assessment and you are sitting with your teacher candidate, maybe you've had them come up with a summary of needs and strengths. Maybe you can sit and discuss with them about next steps and your rationale for those. Now, the edTPA does have some clear rules or expectations about what kind of support that you give as being acceptable or unacceptable. Acceptable supports are listed here in this edTPA document. So you can and should, if they ask, discuss the tasks and the scoring rubrics, taking a look at the rubric together and clearing up information or misunderstandings about certain vocabulary would be useful. Looking at samples of previously edTPA portfolio materials. So I usually do that in my seminar, as do many professors. Discussing support documents. So as I said earlier, oftentimes the questions that the teacher candidate has or you might have are actually in the handbook that they have or a document called Making Good Choices. And so looking there might be that is definitely a way to help students. So when you observe them, thinking about some of the rubric language and using that in your observations and your evaluations is good. You can look at their material and you can ask probing questions. You just can't directly edit, or provide specific answers to any of the edTPA prompts. And you can arrange and help with and give technical assistance during the video portions. So co-planning with the mentor for this is allowed, but it's the teacher candidate that offers the justifications in the planning commentary. And these are the unacceptable supports. So basically, don't edit their official materials prior to submission. It's better not to even look at them, but you can talk to them about them while they're in the business of making them, correct? So don't offer any critiques of their responses, any kind of specific or alternative response to anything that's going to be going in for official scoring. And don't tell the students which video clips you think they should use, and don't do any of the uploading for them. These are things that are considered to be unacceptable supports. edTPA has helped ETSU's teachers a lot. We feel that our teacher candidates have learned to plan intentionally and to use their knowledge of students, subject-specific pedagogy and methodology, and sound educational research. So we feel like there's more intentional planning. We do find the edTPA to be educative. There is a revitalized emphasis on data-informed instruction, which is important in today's public schools. We are asking students to focus on academic language that goes beyond academic vocabulary. We have increased our focus on giving quality academic feedback as part of the assessment process, and questioning and student engagement as a part of the instruction process. We are working more to get students back to thinking about student-centered and less lecture-oriented teaching, and it has increased emphasis on meaningful reflective practice. So here are our lovely candidates. Some of them now may be your colleagues. We really appreciate the time you took to watch this video. I hope it has been beneficial for you and that you have learned some things today. If you have questions, you can reach me at ETSU at any time. I am the edTPA coordinator. I'm a clinical instructor. You can reach me by emailing rockts@etsu.edu, or you may call me. Have a nice day.